Chapter 19 In the Shadows. By the end of January, most of the snow had disappeared from the monastery fields, but on the high summits of Gran Sasso, the white mantle remained undisturbed. Gabriel had still to face the cold, wet fury of the Abruzzi winter. By the day, the bitter, piercing wind blew down from the snow-capped mountains. By night, the cold, damp air penetrated every room in the monastery. In those days, the luxury of central heating was unknown. There was no fire, no warmth, no comfort. Like soldiers on active service, young passionate students accepted such hardships as part of their daily lives. Gabriel did not complain of his lot, but his growing weakness must have been clearly apparent to the discerning eye. He had developed that remote, withdrawn appearance of one who lives with pain as a constant companion. It was not so much his outward look, the frail body, the sunken cheeks with their telltale flush, the eyes bright with the slow-consuming fever in his blood. It was not even the slowness of his gait, the lightness of his breath, the gentle habitual diffidence of his manner. Rather was it clearly visible in his sweet-tempered smile, in his look of detachment, in his air of calm expectancy, as of one who had already said his last goodbyes, and now awaited only the moment of departure. Father Norbert grimly continued his losing battle. He vacated his own room and transferred Gabriel to it in the hopes of securing beneficial results from its sheltered position and sunny southern aspect. Like most of his contemporaries, the priest distrusted the open air and would have kept Gabriel indoors with the window tightly closed night and day. But the doctor firmly believed in the benefits of fresh air and gentle exercise, and at his bidding, Gabriel was allowed out for a short walk whenever the weather permitted. His failing strength would not allow him to go far from the monastery. No longer was he permitted to join in any of the daily exercises. The bells continued to call his brethren to choir, to meditation, to prayer, but the solitary figure of Gabriel remained pacing slowly to and fro, lost in thought until it was time for him to return to his room. Thus isolated from his companions, Gabriel must sometimes have felt rather lonely and forlorn, an idle, useless member of the community. But even in this unpromising situation, he continued his modest apostolate. One of the young farmhands, Xavier Tortella, vividly remembered several meetings with Gabriel shortly before his death. In quotes, "For 4 or 5 days in succession," he recalled, "he joined me every morning as I drove the sheep to the fields and walked in silence with me part of the way. As we parted company, he asked me to pray to the Blessed Virgin, often during the day by saying 3 Hail Marys. On my way back in the evening, I found him waiting for me at the same place, and immediately he asked me if I had done as he suggested." End quotes. Actually, on that first day, young Tortella forgot all about it and complained that he was too busy minding the sheep. Gabriel smilingly answered his objections in his own inimitable way. In quotes, "Don't you know how much the Madonna can do for you?" he said. "She can make you a saint. She can protect you from so many dangers." Then he added with a winning smile, "The little sheep will be so good if only you will say the 3 Hail Marys. Tell me now, would it cost you a farthing to say a few Hail Marys?" Even as an old man, the shepherd vividly remembered the tone of his voice, and remembered too that, in quotes, "he said that to me in such a lovely way." End quotes. Tortella was almost convinced, but not quite. On his return, he was able to report that he had said his 3 Hail Marys about 20 times. But Gabriel was not satisfied. Next day, he had a medal of Our Lady on a cord, which he hung around the lad's neck. "Listen, Xavier," he said earnestly. "Today, every time you see this medal, would you please say your 3 Hail Marys?" This time Tortella was so impressed that he prayed all day long, as he vividly said, from morning till night. When he told Gabriel of his success that evening, the saint's face lit up with such a radiant smile that the poor shepherd boy felt tears come to his eyes. It was Gabriel's final effort to keep his vow to spread devotion to Mary. Next morning, Gabriel was not at his usual place. The young shepherd never saw him again. Gabriel was still making a brave effort to fight against his growing weaknesses, but in his heart he knew he could no longer hope for victory. On Sunday, February 16th, he painfully struggled downstairs to the church, where he heard Mass, received Holy Communion, and remained for a Mass of thanksgiving. The effort was too much. Gasping for breath, as he climbed the stairs once more, Gabriel slowly regained his room. His last reserve of strength was spent. He could do no more. Yielding to the insistence of the anxious Father Norbert, Gabriel lay down to rest and spent Monday in bed. It was a precautionary measure against the danger of overexertion, but it proved to be too late. Next evening, as Father Norbert was passing by his cell, he heard a faint cry within. As the priest paused, Gabriel opened the door. He was deadly pale, with a trickle of blood coming from his lips, a small pool of blood already on the floor. This was the second severe hemorrhage that proved a prelude to the end. At once, the doctor was summoned, and recognizing the extreme gravity of the case, he decided to remain all night at the monastery to assist the patient. There could be no doubt now that his condition was precarious, and seeing no sign of improvement, Father Norbert gently broke the news that it would be advisable for him to receive viaticum. "When I told him," said Father Norbert, "I saw him start a little, as if taken unawares, and a faint troubled shadow fell across his face, a look which did not last even for a minute, but only for a few seconds. At once he regained his usual calm, to which he added such a measure of gaiety that I had to check him several times to keep it within limits." Although it was now late, actually a little after 9 o'clock on Tuesday night, February 18th, no further time was lost. Gabriel was well prepared to receive the divine guest, but he wished to mark the solemnity of the occasion in a special way. He begged Father Norbert to allow him to leave his bed and kneel on the floor to receive viaticum. When this was refused, he pleaded that he might at least kneel up in the bed in token of reverence and adoration. This request too was denied, and Gabriel reconciled himself as best he could. Calm and composed, he awaited the coming of his sacramental Lord. Back to his mind came the thought he had so often expressed before. In the hour of death we can say, "Dear Jesus, I have so often welcomed you into my poor heart. Now you can welcome me into paradise." Night prayers had not long been finished when the community walked slowly in procession to accompany the Blessed Sacrament to Gabriel's room. The flickering flames of the candles lit up the narrow cell, throwing dark, grotesque shadows on the whitewashed walls, but the radiant face of the dying saint seemed to outshine the feeble light. Humbly, he begged pardon for any bad example he had given, for any fault against charity, and then he asked them all to pray for him in this hour of need. As they heard the weak voice that sometimes sank to a barely audible whisper, many wept silently. Then, in tenderness and tears, he received Holy Communion with extraordinary devotion, and remained wrapped in silent thanksgiving. To those who stood at his bedside, it seemed that he would not last the night, but Gabriel knew his time had not yet come. In the course of the night he turned to the infirmarian and said, "If the Lord should wish to have me with him tonight, may his will be done, but I'm afraid I can foresee that the illness will last a good while yet, and I'm sorry about that. No matter what happens, may his will be done always." Then he repeated at intervals one of his favorite ejaculations, "May the most holy, loving, and adorable will of God be always done." Father Norbert stayed in the room all night to see if he needed anything. Once, when they were alone for a few minutes, Gabriel beckoned him closer. Pointing to his table, he said in a low voice, "Father, in the drawer of that little table there is a notebook in which are jotted down the graces which I know I have received through our Blessed Lady. I'm afraid the devil may use it to tempt me to vainglory. Promise me you'll take it away and let no one see it." "I promise," said Father Norbert, "and what's more, I promise I won't even look at it myself." "Good," said Gabriel briefly, then added with a little smile, "Remember, every promise should be kept." Immediately, the priest opened the drawer, took out the little notebook, and went away to destroy it. Shortly afterwards, he returned to assure Gabriel that he had kept his promise. The notebook was no more. It had been burned and reduced to ashes. A great deal has been written about this incident, and posterity has perhaps been unduly harsh in its judgment on Father Norbert. In quotes, "This hasty action of Father Norbert," observes Father Casimir Laurenti, "which went far beyond the express wishes of the saint, leads us to believe that he did not realize the importance of this manuscript for the immediate history of his disciple." End quotes. But before pronouncing a final judgment, it is important to have all the facts. In his evidence in the process, Father Norbert gives his own recollection of what happened. In quotes, "He did not make any difficulty about me seeing it," he said, "for he concealed nothing from me, but he did not want anyone else to see it. I was well aware of the beauty of his soul, aware too of the immediate onslaught of Satan. I feared lest an attack on this point might well destroy the work effected with such unremitting effort during the past 6 years. Without stopping to think of what I was doing, like a numbskull, I acted hastily, for I took away the diary, which I remember was but a few folded sheets of paper, and destroyed it. When I came back to tell him it was done, he was very happy and thanked me with a sweet smile, saying, 'Well done.'" In his MS Memoirs, Father Norbert adds further details. In quotes, "Now the notebook contained in substance an outline of his life," he says, "and in it he had carefully noted one by one the graces that he knew he had received through the Madonna. I am very sorry now that I bound myself by such a promise, and I grieve that I was perhaps more exact in keeping it than was necessary, for there was much edifying matter contained in the little book." End quotes. As a further extenuating circumstance, it should be remembered that Gabriel was dying and that Father Norbert was doing all that was humanly possible to soothe and comfort his last hours. The priest felt that it would be better to sacrifice the possible future gain in order to restore tranquility to the dying saint. His secret list of graces would be made known only in eternity. As he was very weak, the infirmarian decided that it would give Gabriel some relief to take off his heavy habit. The dying saint refused to consent to this until his confessor persuaded him to make the sacrifice and to submit himself in all to God's will. But it was a painful and bitter parting, and Gabriel wept as the habit was gently removed from his wasted frame. Seizing the rough cloth in his thin hands, he kissed it through his tears and spoke to it as if it were a living thing. "Oh, forgive me," he cried. "I thought I would have had the consolation of dying in you, but obedience and necessity will not allow it. Forgive me, please forgive me." It is hardly surprising that those who witnessed this touching scene found tears in their own eyes too. Gabriel insisted that his habit be draped across a chair and placed close beside the bed where he could see it all the time and stretch out his hand to touch it. Under the devoted care of the doctor and infirmarian, Gabriel rallied somewhat and for about 10 days seemed to maintain his strength. But the insidious hidden ravages of the disease continued unabated. His high intermediate fever alternated with cold sweats that made him shudder uncontrollably. Sometimes his stomach rejected all food and Gabriel could take nothing. The infirmarian would gently coax him, "Come now, take a little for love of the Madonna." Immediately he would try his utmost for Our Lady's sake. Again they would urge him to eat under obedience, and at once the effort was forthcoming. It was the same with medicines. No matter how bitter the draught, Gabriel took it without a murmur. But his weakness increased day by day, and all helplessly recognized they could have only one end. The wonder drugs of modern medicine were unknown in 1862, but the doctor did his best with what was available. As a last resort, he wanted to apply 2 plasters to Gabriel's chest, but the patient had reached the limit of endurance. "What's the good of it?" he asked, "now that I'm more dead than alive?" Then he recollected himself and at once expressed his sorrow. "I have a scruple that I may be acting against God's will. I take back what I said. If they want to put on plasters, let them go ahead. I'm ready for them." Next time the doctor called, Gabriel humbly apologized for seeming to go against his instructions. He came very often to check up on the patient, and Gabriel never failed to thank him for his care and attention. Helplessly, the doctor could only watch the disease take its fatal course. There was no hope of checking it now. All he could hope to do was to ease the pain that racked Gabriel's thin and wasted body. Seeing his unfailing cheerfulness, his calm acceptance of suffering, his wonderful peace and resignation, the doctor often left the sick room with tears in his eyes. More than once he exclaimed, "Oh, what a good religious he is! He's like a little angel. How patiently he bears his pain." Word had spread outside the monastery that the saintly student was dying. The simple country folk around Isola were touched at the thought of the young life ebbing away so painfully and slowly behind the silent walls of the retreat. Few of them knew Gabriel by sight, fewer still had spoken with him, yet all knew of his holiness. Their sympathy went beyond mere words. One kind-hearted farmer, Egidio Ottavani, sent in fresh milk every day, specially for the invalid. Gabriel was deeply touched by this kindly gesture. He was praying once with his usual simplicity, asking his dear Heavenly Mother to reward the charity of those who were looking after him, when he suddenly remembered his special benefactor. His simple prayer continued, in quotes, "And what can I do for that poor man who sent the milk every day? Mother mine, will you remember to reward him? Give him every grace he needs for soul and body." End quotes. Father Norbert granted Gabriel's wish to be allowed to express his thanks personally. The good farmer, feeling strange and ill at ease within the austere corridors of the monastery, was brought to the cell of the dying student. Gabriel's smile of gratitude seemed to light up the whole room. He stretched out his pale hands to grasp the calloused, toil-worn hands of the worker and thanked him in such tender words that the good man wept for joy. The fact was that Gabriel was not used to being the center of such solicitous attention. He told Father Norbert, in quotes, "The care and attention given to me so lavishly during my illness couldn't be greater if I were a prince. Dear God, how shall I ever repay it? What charity there is in religion! I am touched and overcome." End quotes. Moreover, he failed to realize that the narrow cell in which he lay had become a school of perfection. Instinctively, his brethren realized that here before their eyes they had the embodiment of all those ideals of the spiritual life with which they had long been familiar in theory. There was therefore the keenest rivalry amongst his fellow students for the coveted honor of being allowed to minister in the sick room. One complained to Father Norbert that he had been passed over and not allowed to watch in his regular turn. Another resented being sent away before his time was up. As Father Norbert well said, in quotes, "The warm grace of his manner acted like a magnet, attracting his brethren to his bedside and holding them there almost involuntarily. It was something more than just fraternal charity that made them so anxious to attend him. The real reason was the saintly joy of the invalid's disposition, which like the summer sun warmed and cheered all who came to see him." End quotes. Gabriel was full of concern for those who had to look after him. In countless little ways, he touchingly tried to show his gratitude to those who attended him with such unselfish care. He asked that the night watchers should not be allowed to stay up too long with him and should be changed at frequent intervals. If one had lost part of a night's sleep, Gabriel begged permission for him to take extra rest during the day. When one objected that he could not sleep during the day, Gabriel flashed a smile at him. "Well, at least you can try," he retorted. Then turning to Father Norbert, who stood by, he said, "Father, find out how obedient he is. Send him off to bed." Another student, Frater Vincent, came to Father Norbert with a request. In quotes, "To help Frater Gabriel does me such spiritual good and is a source of such edification to me," he said, "that I like to stay every night with him. I can make up for it by taking extra rest during the day." Gabriel quickly noticed the arrangement and begged him to lie down and take some sleep. Frater Vincent sturdily protested that he was all right. "Well then," said Gabriel, "I'll have to tell Father Norbert about you. I simply can't let you stay here all night with no sleep. I don't want you to get laid up on my account." His extreme weakness, coupled with the violence of the fever, rendered his suffering more acute. Mindful of the sufferings of Christ during his passion and of the sorrows of Mary, he not only accepted suffering, he ran to embrace it. He clasped it to his heart with resignation, even with joy, for it made him more conformable to the image of his crucified Lord. He saw even a refinement of pain by refusing such small comfort as might be afforded by changing his position or lying in an easier posture. In quotes, "He conquered the pains and discomforts of his malady with such success," said another witness, "that a smile was ever on his lips and a look of happiness upon his face. But beneath his external cheerfulness, it was easy to see the anguish and agony that tormented him." End quotes. He could make light of his pain and dissemble his feelings so successfully that few guessed the depth of his suffering. When asked how he was feeling, his smiling answer was even light-hearted. In quotes, "Much the same as usual, like the blind beggar." End quotes. The only one who knew the secret of his heart was the devoted Father Norbert, who remained near him day and night. When they were alone, Gabriel bared his soul to his spiritual guide. He wept to be so lacking in mortification, so much afraid of suffering, so wanting in virtue, failing to offer up his pains for love of Jesus and Mary. When he accused himself of trying to lie a little more comfortably in bed, Father Norbert too was close to tears. Wisely and kindly, he told him it was enough to offer all his sufferings in general to Jesus and Mary, and that if he wanted to change his position to be more comfortable, to do so without scruple. Watchful all the time, Father Norbert was never far away, now comforting him, now exhorting him, occasionally giving him a gentle reprimand. Once he thought he heard Gabriel murmur in a low tone, complaining of his pain. Fearful lest any shadow of imperfection should mar the masterpiece of his soul, Father Norbert spoke rather sharply, telling him to bear his suffering with patience and not to lose the merit of them by complaining. Gabriel looked up at him calmly and said with his usual little smile, "Don't worry, Father. I wasn't impatient or complaining." On another occasion, seeing him a little better, Father Norbert tried to cheer him by asking in a joking manner, "Well, Frater Gabriel, when do you want to make your last will and testament?" Answering in the same spirit, Gabriel at once replied, "Oh, it's a good will, and well made long ago. Oh, what a grace the Lord has given me." This exchange reminded Gabriel that one task was left undone. He had promised his father to write if anything unusual should turn up, and the unfulfilled promise weighed on his mind. Turning to Father Norbert, he suggested that perhaps it was now time to write. The priest reassured him, telling him not to worry any more about it, and that when the time came, he would attend to it. With that, Gabriel was content. All was taken care of now. For Father Norbert, too, Gabriel had a special sympathy. They had been so closely associated for so long that each could divine the other's thoughts. It was the priest's part to act as spiritual guide, but Gabriel knew instinctively that he dreaded the inevitable end. In his own gentle way, he tried to ease the pain of parting. In quotes, "I was filled with sorrow at the thought of losing this dear boy," confessed Father Norbert, "and no matter how I argued the point with myself, I could not control my emotions. My grief did not escape his keen eye. What trouble that poor sick child took not to cause me added pain. Despite his weakness, he always tried to talk to me. He tried to hide the inevitable decline of his failing strength. He tried to make me realize the joy which filled his soul, and thus to ease and comfort my own anguish." End quotes. In his own mind, there was no room for doubt. Father Norbert was sure that Gabriel would go straight to heaven. One day he voiced his thoughts on behalf of his companions. In quotes, "When you are in heaven," he said softly, "will you remember to say a little prayer for us? We have all been together in this world, and we want to be all together in heaven. The one who gets there first will have to take care of those who are coming later." Gabriel smiled as he made an oblique answer. In quotes, "I trust in the mercy of God and the intercession of my dear mother that I will keep the promise I am making to you now." End quotes. He was still smiling as he fell asleep. As always, his thoughts centered on the sorrows of Mary. In the course of his spiritual reading, he had collected a store of anecdotes about those who had practiced this devotion and who had reaped the reward of a happy and peaceful death. Doubtless, he recalled a sentiment which he had frequently expressed in the past. In quotes, "We don't realize at present how profitable is this devotion, but we shall realize it at the moment of death, when we are at the last breath." End quotes. He hoped and prayed that he too might have such consolation. In quotes, "If we compassionate her now in her sorrows," he said again, "she will have pity on us and will assist us in our last agony. We may not be worthy enough for her to come in person, in visible form, to our deathbeds, as she has come to so many others, nor should we expect it, but if she likes, she will even do that too." End quotes. During his early days in religion, he had composed a prayer to Our Lady of Sorrows for a happy death. Its sentiments were very appropriate to his present plight, and he recited it with special fervor. In quotes, "O Mother of Sorrows, by the anguish and love with which thou didst stand by the cross of Jesus, stand by me in my last agony. To thy maternal heart I commend the last 3 hours of my life. Offer these hours to the Eternal Father, in union with the agony of our dear Lord, an atonement for my sins. Offer to the Eternal Father the most precious blood of Jesus Christ, mingled with thy tears on Calvary, so that I may obtain the grace of receiving Holy Communion with the most perfect love and contrition before my death, so that I may breathe forth my soul in the presence of Jesus. Dearest Mother of Sorrows, when the moment of my death has come, present me to Jesus as your child. Beg him to receive me into the kingdom of his glory, to be united with him forever and ever. Amen." All day long he continued an unceasing flow of short prayers and ejaculations to Jesus crucified and to Our Lady of Sorrows. Often, too, he invoked the aid of St. Joseph for a happy death. In quotes, "Dear Jesus," he repeated over and over again, "love for love, suffering for suffering, blood for blood. My dear sweet Mother Mary, you know how much I love you. I have vowed my love to you. Please keep your promise to me now. Dear St. Joseph, where are you? Don't you see I'm dying? Come and help me now." End quotes. Before his illness, he had always said his prayers silently and unheard. Now, no longer fully master of himself, he recited them aloud, sometimes indeed so loudly that Father Norbert protested and told him to lower his voice. For a while, Gabriel remembered the injunction, but soon his fevered brain forgot, and he was again saying his prayers aloud. His fervor and unaffected simplicity caused many to leave the room in tears, and in quotes, "I saw some greatly touched and with tearful eyes," said Father Norbert, rather pointedly, "who were not usually so devout or given to weeping." End quotes. During the next few days, Gabriel was given the general absolutions of the various confraternities in which he had been enrolled. The improvement in his condition had proved only temporary, and Gabriel was told to prepare for extreme unction. Calmly he prepared for the consoling rite, asking Father Norbert to help him by recalling the effects of the sacrament. His hearing had been affected by the fever, so Gabriel asked in advance that the prayers should be said in a louder voice than usual, so that he could hear and answer them. It was difficult to arrange him in bed for the anointing of loins, so as the ritual allows, the priest wanted to omit it, but Gabriel insisted on the ceremony being carried out in every detail. "Wait," he cried, "wait a moment, I'll manage to move." His strength was so spent that it was pitiful to see his puny effort. Not until the infirmarian had lifted him with strong and willing arms was he able to receive the final anointing. After that, there was little left to do except to wait the final call. He knew that his prayer of many years was on the point of being answered, but he was content to await God's moment. After receiving extreme unction, he was so weak and exhausted that the kind-hearted infirmarian suggested, in quotes, "Pray to the good Lord to take you to heaven quickly." Gabriel remembered the strict injunction of Father Norbert and replied with touching simplicity, in quotes, "I can't, because my spiritual father has forbidden me to pray like that." End quotes. Gabriel was long since dispensed from all active observance, but faithful to the end, he joined in as much of the common life as his ebbing strength allowed. Formal meditation had been forbidden him on account of his exhausted condition, and this was a real sacrifice for his fervent soul. Lying awake through the long, weary hours of the night, Gabriel watched the hands of the clock move slowly onward until they marked the time for matins. Then he gently called his companion to remind him it was time to sound the signal for the community to rise for the night office. When the bell indicated the time for spiritual reading, Gabriel asked his attendant to read a little from his favorite book, The Glories of Mary. As the community assembled for night prayers at the close of day, Gabriel allowed the beads to slip one by one through his wasted fingers as he accompanied them in prayer. His breviary had long since been laid aside. He was no longer able to meditate, but in his hands he held his greatest treasures, his crucifix and a little picture of the Mother of Sorrows. Long and lovingly he looked at them, held them to his lips, pressed them to his heart. His thoughts were focused on those two objects of his love. No shadow of doubt or fear fell across these days of waiting. With loving confidence he felt sure that God would welcome him to paradise, a blessing which he hoped his companions would also share. "Yes," he said, "we're going to heaven. In heaven we shall rejoice forever with Jesus and our dear Mother Mary. Oh, how happy prospect! But when shall it be?" The time was very close at hand now. The span of life left to him could be measured in hours. But within those final hours, a searching spiritual ordeal still awaited him.